So should I start?
So let us start. So we are very happy to have Gabi Tzafrir with us today. He will talk about n=1 Lagrangians for n=3 SCFTs. And so please ask questions, either just unmute yourself and ask questions or in the chat.
Okay, thank you very much for letting me the opportunity to speak here. And what I'm going to talk to you today is based on this article that recently appeared. You know, as the title suggests, the basic idea of what we're going to talk about is a question of finding n=1 Lagrangians for various theories that are so-called Lagrangian theories. Various theories that are expected not to have a Lagrangian manifest in their full symmetry. A very, I guess, striking example of this type of theories are n=3 SCFTs that were recently found. And in this case, these are thought to be inherently strongly coupled and to not have Lagrangians that can manifest the full n=3 supersymmetry. However, this does not preclude the possibility of having some Lagrangian n=1 theory, or something that flows to that theory in the IR. In this talk, I'm going to try to discuss how one can go about finding such models. Now one can then check whether or not this model actually flow, have a consistent with flowing to n=3 SCFTs. Now you can ask, why should we study this? I think there are several reasons why this is interesting. First, I think it's interesting in its own right. It's a very clear statement of announcement of supersymmetry. It also is interesting to the question of whether or not how non-Lagrangian or non-Lagrangian theories. Finally, it's also interesting, it gives you some opportunity to maybe study the n=3 SCFTs themselves in a novel way. Okay, so that's the general motivation of what I want to talk about. Now, the outline of this talk is going to be as follows. I will begin with some introduction. First, I will outline the general strategy that I will use to try and formulate this n=1 Lagrangian. Then I will go on to discuss a bit about n=3 SCFTs. I will mostly be interested in the structure of the moduli spaces. After that, I will go on about discuss how we're going about to conjecture such n=1 models. Then I'm going to give an example to illustrate all of these things. The example I will use is in terms of specific n=3 SCFTs, such as rank 1, a dimension 3 Coulomb watch operator. Finally, I will end up with some conclusions. Okay, so we should begin with the general strategy. So what we want to do is we want to find an n=1 model that flows in the IR to n=3 SCFT, potentially with some collection of decoupled free chiral fields. Because generally these flows are going to be complicated. So to try and help us for models, we try to use various RG invariant quantities. Now we have two things that we need to do. First, we need to conjecture such models, and then we need to test them. What we will do is we will use the 't Hooft anomalies, which are one form of an RG invariant quantity, to help us conjecture models. Once we have a model, we can then use the superconformal index, which is another type of an RG invariant quantity, to try to test whether or not such models actually have the right properties to float n=3 SCFT. Now, there is one problem with using the superconformal index for that matter, that is that it is usually not known for the n=3 SCFTs. So to do that, to circumvent what we'll do is we consider the moduli space of the theory. We try to infer that about the presence of some special type of operator, and we will use that to form some conjecture about some minimal conjecture about what the superconformal index of this theory should be. That's the general strategy that I'm going to follow here. Now, in the rest introduction, I will talk a bit about n=3 SCFTs. So, n=3 SCFTs are in 4 dimensions, they're n=3 supersymmetry, that is 12 conserved supercharges. Now, the basic free multiplet that these SCFTs support is the n=3 vector multiplet, which is happen to be equal to the n=4 vector multiplet. This leads people to believe that any theory that has a Lagrangian that has n=3 supersymmetry also has n=4 supersymmetry. And such purely n=3 theories are expected to be inherently strongly coupled. Now, they are known to have a U1 times U3R symmetry group and support no other global symmetries. Now, there are various ways in which you can engineer them in string theory. One way is they can be realized by having a collection of the 3 branes probing an S-fold singularity. Now, I'm not going to talk a bit in detail about what this string theory construction is, but I will mention that the S-folds are some generalization of Orienti folds, which are given in F theory by an orbifold of the direction orthogonal to the brane, and also the F theory torus. Now, another way to generate them in field theory is they can be given by discretely gauging some discrete symmetries of n equal to 4 SCFTs. Now, here we'll mostly be interested in n equal to SCFTs that come from this family. These are constructed that they don't have an underlying n equal to 4 SCFT as a fan theory. Okay, so what I'm mostly interested is the moduli space of these theories. Now, we know that in general, theories that have supersymmetry have a moduli space of vacua. For instance, n equal to 2 SCFTs of the Coulomb bunch and the Higgs bunch. N equal to 3 SCFTs being also n equal to 2 SCFTs also have Higgs bunch and Coulomb bunch, and these actually combine to form one large moduli space. Now, the moduli space can be parameterized by coordinates. For the cases of n equal to 3 SCFTs, the basic coordinates are 3 complex scalars. We know that for n equal to 2 theory, the Higgs bunch is parameterized by 2 complex scalars, and a Coulomb bunch usually by 1 complex scalar. These two combine together to form one moduli space parameterized by 3 complex scalars. Now, in the more familiar case of n equal to 4 SCFTs, these are just the 6 real scalar fields that exist in the vector multiplets. Now, for the theories we consider here, the moduli space is going to be of the following form. We'll have some C3 alpha, where R is the rank of the theory, photophase n equal to 2 theory. It will be quotient by some discrete group called gamma, which in our case is going to be a complex reflection group. Now, I'm not going to need to know too much about what complex reflection groups are. We'll just mention briefly that they are defined by their action on space on Zn. Let's say we parameterize it by this coordinate Z1, Z2, up to Zn. And are parameterized by the fact that the action only can be generated by reflection at the transformation of this form. And goes to angle. I will also, on one coordinate or on some collection of coordinates. Now, this also implies, by the way, that permutations is also a complex reflection because the difference between the coordinates is transformed to minus itself. So these groups can be non-abelian. I will also mention that this structure is not necessary, but there are possibilities that the group can be overfold by some other groups, not the complex reflection group, and there may be more general forms. But in here, I will not consider this. I will assume that this is the structure. I will only consider that this is the structure of the moduli space. Now, the main interest, yes?
There is a question. Can K depend on I in the last line?
And K, what the question again?
In the last line?
Yes.
Can K depend on I?
Oh, no. You should be able to. Well, in principle, the definition is only that they are generated by some collection of reflections. So the most notable cases usually K not dependent on I, so you can do it for any I because they also usually contain a permutation group, but there can be exceptional cases where the coordinates are not symmetric. And then possible is one coordinate supports one K and the other one, you only do it for a special value. But the general definition is only that they can be generated by some collection of, by some number of complex reflections.
Okay. And there is another question. Can there be n equals 3 theories without a moduli space of vacuum?
I don't know of any example. And think about it for a while. I would suspect no, because as we will see soon, the energy momentum tensor of n equal to 3 is belong to some of the special multiplets that are related to coordinates of the moduli space. So I would naively suspect that no. Okay, so I mentioned the main interest of why we want to consider the moduli space will be to give us some information about the operator spectrum in the theory. Notably, if you have a SCFT as a moduli space, then it has some specific collection of operators whose wave usually span the moduli space. Now, and this usually leads to some special collection, usually special kind of ring of operators that have this structure. For instance, n equal to SCFTs, this leads us to the Coulomb bunch and Higgs bunch kind of ring operator, whose wave parameter is the Coulomb bunch or the Higgs bunch. In the case, of course, of n equal to SCFT, these two combine, and there is just one collection of these operators. Now, the point is that if you understand the structure of the moduli space, then you can understand also the structure of this specific special subset of operators. This will be our main interest here. So, as I mentioned, consider you have the space C3R before we model it out. We consider introducing the coordinates Zi and Zi bar for it. Here there will be R coordinates Zi. It will be each one of them will be a triplet of complex numbers. Now, then these are in mapped in the n equal to SCFTs to these two types of VPS or multiplets. Here I'm using the notation of the VPS multiplet introduced by these authors. So I will mention a bit about what notation means. So if you have a VPS operator, that means it's a shorter notation, and therefore it's based on shortened conditions. That means that it is analyzed by some combination of supercharges. It can be either shorted with respect to Q or shorted with respect to Q bar. And these two letters, B and B bar, represent the shortened condition it's obeyed. So this one is the shortened condition it's obeyed with respect to Q. This one is shortened condition with respect to Q bar. P1 happens to be the shortest possible shortened condition. So operator of type B1, B1 bar obey the shortest possible VPS operators. In n equal to 2, they're analog in terms of shortened condition of X bunch of chi-ring operators. Now, if beside the shortened condition, I will also need to know the charges of the ground set in order not to specify the multiplet, as then the full multiplet can be given by acting on the ground set with Q and Q bar. This is what represented by these numbers here. They represent the charge on the ground set under all the bosonic symmetries. Notably, you have the Lorentz group. This is a scalar. The dilatation group, which then is dimension 1, and the R symmetry. So it's in the fundamental of the S with the R symmetry, and it has U1R charge 2. And similarly, this one is in the anti-fundamental, and has U1R charge minus 2. These operators map to the coordinates Z1, Z, and this one map to the coordinates Z bar. Again, you can notice the coordinates are scalars, the dimension 1. There are triplet of them, so and that's from the fundamental representation of the S3. The R symmetry has a natural action on the C3 part, and this can be given by the charges of these fields. So this is the mapping between at least the basic coordinate of C3R and specific multiplets in n equal to superconformal multiplets. However, as I mentioned, usually the operators see these coordinates are not the actual coordinates that span the moduli space. It is because we need to limit them to some combination that are invariant under the group gamma. Now, usually, figuring this out or returning this information will tell us about what sort of operators or these specific shortened condition are present in the n equal to SCFT. So that's the general idea of the correlation between the moduli space and the operator spectrum. I should probably give some example to illustrate this. So the simplest example is going to take just n equal to 4 super n mills. And to be concrete, I will take the gauge group to be UN. So the matter quantity just you have an n equal to 1 vector multiplet of type UN and 3 adjoint chiral fields. There is a super potential, which is completely anti-symmetric in 3 adjoint fields, which implies that in the vacuum state they can be completely diagonalized. So, for instance, for n equal to 3, for n SU3, U3, sorry. Then this is an example, so you can diagonalize the matrix. You will have the 3 values in the diagonal. This is one chiral field. Additionally, you will have another 2 of them. And the values of the diagonal span the moduli space. In general, you will have n of them on the diagonal. Additionally, you have three chiral fields. So you have n copies of 3 complex scalar fields. Now, these parameters is space C3n. However, these values are not gauge invariant. The chiral fields are in the adjoint representation. We need to limit to gauge invariance. When you have chosen to diagonalize them, you've already broken some of the gauge symmetry, but there is some residual gauge symmetry remaining, given by gauge transformation that keeps the field in diagonal form. This is given by the Val group of UN, which is a symmetric group, Sn. So the full moduli space is given by C3n, modeled out by Sn. Here Sn is, of course, some example of a complex reflection group. Okay, so this is the example of how this is the moduli space. Now we want to consider what is the coordinate span the moduli space. So it's convenient to do that by thinking about this in terms of increasing number of coordinates. So we first think about coordinates invariant coming from 1 coordinate, then from product of 2 coordinates, 3 coordinates, and so forth. So if you want to use just 1 coordinate, of course, any coordinate by itself will not be invariant under the permutation symmetry. So you have to take the sum of them, and that will be invariant. Similarly, you have to take the sum of the complex conjugate. So we have these 2 coordinates, and these map to these 2 VPS operators. And these together form, well, not that they simply form the trace of phi. Here I'm using this big phi collectively now for all 3 complex adjoint scalars. And this is indeed a gauge invariant combination of the value for UN. Now, if you go and you can now go to the next level and think about what invariant I can build if I use two coordinates. So one possibility is to take the coordinate square or multiply coordinates with the complex conjugate, and similarly for the complex conjugate square. However, if n is bigger than 1, then you can also take a coordinate and multiply it with another coordinate. And again, take the addition to make it a symmetric under permutations. And similarly with complex conjugate, with one of the coordinates complex conjugated and two of them complex conjugated. Now, this gives you two copies of the following multiplets. Now, I need to explain how you get this thing. So basically, here you have two coordinates and you multiply them together. Each one of these coordinates is given by an operator this type. So when you multiply them, first of all, the bosonic charges, or at least most the abelian ones, should add up. So the resulting set should still be a scalar, with dimension 2, and you want R charge R. There is some freedom in the multiplication of the SU3 R charge. However, here we are going to insist we're only going to consider sets that are in the same chiral. They still obey the same shortened condition. And one of the demands for obeying the shortened condition is that the dimension is fixed in terms of the SU3R charges. This forces you to take the symmetric product if you want to stay within this chiral ring. So these two coordinates are given by multiplication of these two states, and you will get these charges. If you want to stay, if you want the associated operator that obey this B1, B1, B shortened condition. This one will give you this type of operator, and this one of course gives this one from the complex conjugate of these.
Abi?
These two, yes.
There are two questions in the chat.
Yes.
First, where is the C3? The ZIs are complex numbers in C1?
No, I mentioned it a bit before. I'll mention again. I'm considering parameterizing C3R by then there are just RZ1s, there are Zs, sorry. And each Z actually parameterizes three complex numbers. Each Z is a collection of three complex numbers and transforming the fundamental of SU3. The Z bar transforming the anti-fundamental of the SU3.
Okay. And there was a question a little bit before. There should be also a crystallographic restriction on the complex reflection.
Yes, that is correct. There is a crystallographic restriction. I'm not going to care too much about this one because I'm not getting classification, but indeed, for dimension, there needs to be not every complex reflection is possible. One obvious restriction is that to be crystallographic so that they preserve the electromagnetic lattice that you have on the Coulomb branch.
Okay. And there is a follow-up question on the Z's. What does Z squared mean then if it's a triplet?
You multiply there is some freedom, as I mentioned, in how you choose to multiply the SU3 charges. Of course, you have to contact the SU3 charges in some way. Here, the choice is being made so these are connected symmetrically, so they form the representation in the 6 of SU3. It's also, this is first done so that you will remain in B, so the corresponding operator will again be of the same, obey the same shortened condition. It will be of type B1, B1 bar. There's also another reason that you expect you expect the genetic to multiply coordinate and choose whichever way, in a way that you can choose whichever component you want, up to this issue that they have to obey some symmetry restrictions. So this is the most sense. So this is the sort of product that will give you this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so at the end of the day, you get two copies. So this 6 give you two copies of these types of multiplet. And you can show that these are mapped to two types of operators. One are just a trace of phi, this operator squared. The other one is a trace of the operator phi squared. Now, notice you mentioned that these two operators are only distinct, you only have these two percent if n is bigger than 1. This maps to the fact that trace phi squared is different than trace phi all of it squared, only if n is bigger than 1. So now, this is how you can see the structure. So this is how you can, this is of course the known operator exists in the UN theory. You can continue on to higher number of coordinates, but I'm not going to do that here. Instead, I want to talk about an example that is purely n equal to 3. So it was the case of a purely n equal to 3 LCFT. So as that example, I'm going to take probably one of the most simplest known rank 1 n equal to 3 LCFT that is not related to n equal to 4 theory. And that it says rank 1, It has a first of all, the fact it has a dimension 3 Coulomb branch operator was first considered by these people here. Now, in string theory, it can be given by a single D3 brane on a Z3 S-fold. Now, its moduli space is known to be like this. It's C3 mod Z3. Here, the Z3, we can again think of introducing the coordinate Z1 for specify the entire C3. It's a collection of 3 complex number for C3, and this Z3 acts on Z1 by this transformation. Now we can again think about what is the basic collection of coordinates is invariant under this transformation, and you can convince yourself that there are 3 basic invariants from which every other invariance can be built by multiplying them. And here, just taking the coordinate Z1 to cube, it's the complex conjugate, or multiplying Z1 and Z1 bar. This can be mapped to the following 3 basic Z1 and Z1 bar multiplets. Now, these in turn have some special meaning in the N=3 SCFT. Notably, this multiplet is the energy momentum tensor of the N=3 SCFT. As I mentioned, it is a W1 bar, and it's naturally associated with the combination of coordinates of the moduli space, which is why it's naively seen that the N=3 SCFTs are forced to have a moduli space. Now, additionally, you also have these 2 coordinates, and these actually contain the dimension 3 Coulomb branch operator. The dimension exists in this theory. Okay. So this is how you can understand from the results of the moduli space the presence of specific multiplets in the N=3 SCFTs that are of specific type, notably the shortest one that you can have. Furthermore, it also suggests various relations among them. For instance, you can take this Z1 cube coordinate and you can multiply it with Z1 bar cube to get Z1 cube, Z1 bar cube this way. You can also take this combination and take it to the cubic power to get the same combination of coordinates. In terms of multiplets, this product corresponds to taking the product of this multiplet with this multiplet. But the product with the cubic product of this multiplet corresponds to taking this multiplet and multiply it with itself 3 times. And this relation, since there is only one Z1 cube times Z1 bar cube combination of coordinates, this implies that the B1 times B1 part in the product of these 2 fields and the cubic product of this field should be identified. So this is the general idea of how we can understand the sum structure of the form the moduli space. Now, before I move on to actually discuss natural models for N=3 SCFT, I do want to talk on one other thing that we can observe right now about this specific N=3 SCFT. I mentioned that it possesses a dimension 3 Coulomb-Hen X branch operator. This in particularly means that it contains marginal operators, as dimension 3 chiral fields, that you can then add to the potential, and this will give you marginal deformation that preserve only N=1 supersymmetry. Now, this does not immediately imply that it is a conformal manifold, because there is a possibility that the operators can fail to be exactly marginal. To show that they are exactly marginal, you need to show that there is a non-trivial Kähler quotient under the global symmetry, not the global symmetry they have as viewed as N=1 SCFTs. Now, when viewed as N=1 SCFT, the N=3 SCFT has a U1 times SU3 global symmetry. This is the commutant of the U1 R symmetry inside the U1 times SU3 R symmetry. Now, you can work on the decomposition of as I mentioned, these fields exist in this type of multiplets, and you can decompose them in terms of N=1 superconformal multiplet. You can show that there are precisely 5 marginal operators. They transform. One of them transforms in the 4-dimensional representation of the SU2 and with positive charge on the U1. The other one is a signet of the SU2 with negative charge on the U1. This combination has a 1-dimensional Kähler quotient, which implies there is a 1-dimensional N=1 only preserving conformal manifold. The generic point this symmetry is broken, and you only have the U1R symmetry of the N=1 SCFT. Now, we also note that this result, what I talked about so far, only depends on the composition of the multiplets. So it's very general and true for any N=3 SCFT that has a dimension 3 Coulomb branch operator, that at least this at least a 1-dimensional N=1 present conformal manifold. Okay, so this is what I want to talk about N=3 SCFTs. I next want to return back to our problem. My problem, and that is to try and conjecture N=1 Lagrangian models that flow in the IR2 N=3 SCFT. First, we need to find some form of tool or something to help us find such models. And to do that, we will actually use the 't Hooft anomalies of the n=3 SCFTs, specifically the central charges. There is just one in n=3 SCFTs, it's known that A is equal to C, similar to n=4 SCFTs. So there is only one, of course, as far as only one number as SCFT is concerned. And we're going to use this to help a conjecture model. Specifically, how it's going to work is as follows. We'll make the ansatz that our UV theory is n=1 asymptotically free gauge theory. There's the following meta content. It will have n this number of vector multiplets, this number of chiral multiplets with R charge of 2/3, and this number of chiral multiplets with R charge of 1/3. Now, I first should say something about why I'm making this ansatz. You may have noticed when we talked about the model spaces, the operators spanning the model space all have integer dimensions. Now, while this is not necessarily true in n=3 SCFTs that all VPS operators will have integer dimension, I'm not aware of any examples where we know that there are n=3 SCFTs that doesn't have any, does have a VPS operator that does not integer dimension. So it seems reasonable to try to limit the search space to only theories that can give you that property, that your VPS operator will naturally have integer dimension. Now, since if you have a n=1 theory and if the U1R symmetry, then the superconformal point with that with the U1R symmetry, the superconformal symmetry, the dimension of the operator is going to be given by 1/2 times the R charge. So if all R charges are multiplets of 2/3, then all VPS operator will have integer dimension. Now naively for that, I don't need this chiral multiplet, and I should only work with this chiral multiplet. However, you can show that if all our chiral fields have R charge of 2/3, the condition that the R symmetry is anomaly free is equal to the fact that the beta function vanishes. This will only give you theories that are zero beta function. If you want to allow flow, it's convenient to include also fields with R charge smaller than 2/3. And the easiest choice is to take R charge that is 1/3. In that case, you can still hope that these fields can be gauged charged under the gauge symmetry, and the only gauge divine combination may need to involve an even number of them. And then you still achieve the same result and allow for flows. So that's the general rationale of why I want to take this ansatz. Now, we still need some limitation on what these numbers are going to be, and also how they're going to actually be represented as a gauge theory in terms of gauge groups and meta-content representation under it. Well, we'll use several restrictions. First of all, since we know the R charges of all of these fields, and I'm going to make the assumption that this R symmetry will be the superconformal R symmetry, and you can predict, you can know the central charges, the ANC central charges associated with this number. And we're going to demand this number will be equal to the ANC central charge of our chosen n=3 SCFT. There will be also several additional restrictions on actually how it's represented in terms of as meta content. Specifically, we want to demand that there are no gauge anomalies, that the R symmetry is anomaly free. Now, in terms of actually writing this down in the equations, first, there is one complication we have to consider, and that is the fact that there might be some chiral field which are sort of 2/3 that then if this U1R symmetry is superconformal one, will become free fields. So we may have some free fields in the IR, and I'm going to call their name unfree. This is expected to come mostly from these fields, because the quadratic gauge invariance of this field will have R charge of 2/3. In that case, what we would expect is that the low energy theory will not just be n=3 SCFTs, but will also be the n=3 SCFTs plus the free fields. So our requirement in terms of what we require for the anomalies, 'Hooft anomalies will be these two equations. This one gives you the A central charges of the theory that has this meta content, again assuming that these R charges are given by the superconformal R symmetry. This is the A central, this is the C central charges. We want to demand that these will be equal to the central charges of the n=3 SCFT plus the number of the contribution of the free chiral fields. Now, all that now is left is to choose a specific n=3 SCFT and go over all the possibilities. Now, this may take some time, but we are guaranteed if there is a model that obeys this restriction, that is to obey this formula, then we are guaranteed to find it if we go over enough possibilities. So that's the general strategy. I will next illustrate it with some examples. But first, are there any questions? Okay, if there are no questions, then I will go on to illustrate an example. So as an example, I'm going to take the n=3 SCFT with dimension 3 Coulomb operator that I have mentioned previously. if you looked at the model spaces or the model space of C3 mod Z3. Now, its central charges are known to be these values, and you can put it into the equation, and the two equation reduces to these values. Now, all it left is to go over all cases for solution. As you can see, since the number need to be positive integers, the level of possible, the numbers you can actually go to searches are not that large. And you can just go over cases of this until you find a solution. In this case, it turns out you can find a solution. This is an example of solution. Of course, it's not enough just to tell you that these numbers actually solve this equation. I also need to tell you some gauge theory that actually has these numbers. So we have 6 vector multiples. There is one choice for gauge group that does it, and that's SU2 times SU2. That will be the gauge group. Now, for chiral field without 1/3, we can do that by taking SU2 times SU2 by fundamental. Now, the number of chiral fields are 2/3. It's a bit more intricate, but we can take this. We will take this combination. We need 11 chiral field. Now, we also need to have 1 free. I think that this is not an independent number because it has to match the number of quadratic gauge invariants of these chiral fields. And indeed, an SU2 times SU2 by fundamental is just one quadratic gauge invariant you can build, which if you think about it as a matrix, 2 by 2 matrix, is given by the determinant of the matrix. Now, additionally, you can show that this combination of fields has no gauge anomalies. Notably, there is an even number of doublets, and it's the R symmetry that gives these charges is anomaly free under both SU2 gauge groups. Okay, so this is the model that we will look at. Here I've summarized in a bit more easier way to probably understand. So in the table, I've written down the fields that are present. This is the symbol that I will use for them, the charge on the two SU2 groups, the charge on the U1R symmetry, and the charges on the two abelian anomaly-free global symmetries that exist in this theory. I've also here written down a quiver description of how they look like. You have the two SU2s, there are the fields here. Here are adjoint field, fundamental, the bifundamental, and this one is the bifundamental in the doublet of this group and the triplet of this group. I've also written down again the charges under these two U1s in terms of fugacities. Now, as I mentioned, so far this model was built under the idea that the central charges will match that of n equal to SCFT plus a free chiral. I think if this U1R symmetry is the superconformal R symmetry, however, that is not something that we may necessarily be able to control. So then we need to now answer whether or not this is actually a superconformal R symmetry or not. But then we need to consider what this theory does in the IR. So you can show that the beta function of this theory is negative for both SU2 groups, and therefore it's better to float to strong coupling, while an SCFT potentially trivial in the IR. Now to study it and to determine what is the U1 superconformal symmetry, we'll use a technique of error maximization. Specifically, we define a U1 trial R symmetry, we're given by the U1 R symmetry we defined previously, potentially mixed with these two U1 global symmetries. These two mixing coefficients can then be determined by the condition that they maximize the central charge. You can work it out and you'll find that these are the numbers that do that. Now we can do, as a consistency check, it is useful to verify that all operator dimensions you get with this R symmetry are above unitarity bound. Specifically, the B square operator, the one that has order of 2/3 under this U1R symmetry, and what one might decouple, notice it is a negative charge on the U1X, and because of this mixing, it actually has, with this R symmetry, it actually has R charge above 2/3, it does not violate unitarity. Now, of course, all of these calculations are always under the assumption that there is no accidental U1 symmetry that arises, and then they can mix with the R symmetry and validate this calculation. However, as I mentioned, we have not observed any violation of unitarity, so everything observed is consistent with the fact that this theory flows to an entirety in SCFT with this R symmetry. Of course, since the mixing coefficients are non-trivial here, the R symmetry is not just this U1R symmetry, and most likely has nothing to do with n equal to SCFT. However, we can still be able to salvage this by introducing superpotentials. Basically, the problem that we had is we want this U1R to be the R symmetry, but it is mixed with this symmetry. So the simplest solution is not to break these symmetries by introducing superpotential, and thereby they cannot mix anymore, and they will be forced to go to a theory with this U1R symmetry superconformal R symmetry. There are, of course, two problems that you have to worry about. First, we want to break these two U1 global symmetries, but we don't want to actually break the U1R symmetry. This U1R that we need. So we want the superpotential to preserve it, and for that they have to have R charge of 2. You can go over the field and find you can see that there are precisely 3 operators that have U1R charge 2. I've written these 3 here in terms of the field combination. I've written their charges in terms of U1 B and U1X. And I've also written the U1R charge in terms of the actual superconformal R symmetry, in terms of this R symmetry with these values of the B and X. Now, so we can in principle introduce the superpotential. They will not break the U1R symmetry, but they will break these symmetries. However, now we have to consider what the theory will actually do once we introduce this symmetry with these superpotentials. Now, we know that when the theory is deformed by superpotential, its behavior depends on whether or not the superpotential is relevant, marginal, or irrelevant. Specifically, if it's relevant, the theory will flow to a new theory in the IR. However, if it is irrelevant, the superpotential coupling will just go back to 0 and we have to flow to the exact same theory. Obviously, for our case, we will want the superpotential to break this symmetry and flow to a new theory with a different R symmetry. Hopefully, it will be this one. So for that to work, the superpotential that we introduce must be relevant with respect to the actual superconformal R symmetry that we found. The realization, we can notice that the demanded superpotential is relevant with respect to the R symmetry is that its R charge is smaller than 2. Then we have 2 operators, these 2, whose R charge is smaller than 2, and therefore they are relevant with respect to that fixed point. And if we introduce them all, I suspect they will break part of the symmetries and will flow to a new fixed point. Now, in practice, it's convenient to do this analysis by steps. To first introduce the most relevant one, this one, then repeat the maximization to check if operator. This is done to avoid the fact that one of the operators may become irrelevant once we introduce the other one. In this case, we can do this check. I'm not going to show it here, but in the article, with this check, and you can see that after introduce these operators, these ones both become relevant. Then you can introduce both of them, and you expect to flow to this will break both of these U1B and U1X. You expect to flow to a theory with this U1R symmetry, with central charges will be consistent with n equal to SFTs plus a free field. In fact, we will claim that this theory flows to the n equal to SFTs plus a free field when the n equal to SFT is deformed by a marginal operator. Now, since the flow pattern is a bit intricate here, it's convenient to summarize it with a diagram. So, as I mentioned, we start with the UV with our Lagrangian theory that I introduced previously. We can first consider what this theory does without any superpotential. We talk to the user maximization, and we conclude it's quite likely to go to some fixed point. We notice with respect to that fixed point, the operator given by C square is relevant, and therefore we can introduce it, and we expect to flow to a new theory, which again we can check it consistently. It appears to be consistent with flowing to a different fixed point. We can then check with respect to that fixed point, these 2 operators are also relevant, and therefore we can introduce both of them, and we expect to flow to another theory, which will now, since we've broken all abelian symmetries, will foster the same central charges as the n equal to SCFT, plus a decoupled field that the decoupled ones actually reach this point. However, there is one complication we need to consider. I mentioned that the n equal to SCFT has a marginal as a conformal manifold. So in fact, you can think about it as a collection of theories represented by the value of the marginal coupling, where the n equal to SCFT is a special point in this coupling, and for the rest of the value of the coupling, the theory is an n equal to 1 SCFT. Now, because these all theories, of course, all have the same anomalies. Since we got this from a Lagrangian theory that only preserves the U1R symmetry, and the only thing we have is the central charges, the most natural conjecture is that you are not going to generically land on n equal to SCFT, but instead at some point on this conformal manifold. This is essentially the flow pattern that we propose. Lagrangian theory plus these operators end you up on an n equal to SCFT deformed by a marginal operator. So you're on a conformal manifold of this n equal to SCFT. It only preserves n equal to 1 supersymmetry. Okay, so that's the general structure of the flow theory. Are there any questions about this?
Sorry, can you say again, why do we expect that that it flows to this conformal manifold with connected to n equal to E in the first place. I
Okay.
think you said that.
Okay, as I mentioned, the Lagrangian theory was conjectural. Part of the reason why it's conjectural was that if the U1R symmetry that I mentioned is the superconformal symmetry, then the structural charges of those is n equal to SCFT. That's the reason why you think the low energy theory might have something to do with this n equal to SCFT. Now,
Okay. So, are there any other checks you can do?
yes, I will next talk about what other tests you can do. This is not, of course, the reason why I came in this is not just because they are anomalies. Look, there are several tests that you can do that support this identification. And I will next discuss them if there are no other questions. Okay, so as I mentioned, of course, we now want to perform additional tests to actually see that this what I'm proposing is actually a chance to be true. So since the flow pattern is pretty complicated, there are a lot of flows to strong coupling and the marginal deformations of the SFT, we would like to test it by some bodies that are G invariant and also invariant under various couplings. Now, there are various, of course, objects of this type. The most notable one is tooth anomalies. Those we've already used to conjecture the model, so they are going to work basically by construction. So to test this, we will next use a different RG invariant, notably the superconformal index. So we want to compare the superconformal index of the gauge theory, which you can easily compute, with what we expect from the n equal to SCFT. However, there is some complication in the fact that we do not generally know the superconformal index of the n equal to SCFT, and here is where we will use some of the knowledge that we have encountered from studying the operator spanning the model space of the SCFT. Now, one additional thing we can do is we can also study mass deformation. So I'll next talk a bit about each one of these in turn. So first, the superconformal index. Now, it is straightforward to compute the superconformal index from the Lagrangian theory, and you can find this result. This is, of course, after the removal of the free field. So you need to compute the Lagrangian, the index of the Lagrangian theory, and also remove contributions of free chiral field. Now, we want to compare to that of the n equal to SCFT, but of course, it's point we do not know the full index of the n equal to SCFT. So instead, what we will use is we will use the knowledge that we have covered about the presence of critical operators spanning the module space to formulate a minimal conjecture of what the superconformal index will be. We'll try to compare it against this index. This is two interesting applications. First of all, this will check if the index looks like something that can be n equal to SCFT, because it can then be recovered by using superconformal n equal to superconformal multiplets. And furthermore, also check that this has the correct properties to be the index of the specific n equal to SCFT we're talking about, because it seems to match structure of operators that we know exist in the n equal to SCFT. So generally, so we call it when we talk about the module space, we determine that it should have three specific families, two specific operators, basic operators. One is the multiple of this type, which is then n equal to energy momentum tensor, and the other one are these two multiplets together containing dimension 3 Coulomb operator. Now we can actually determine the contribution to the superconformal index. This is an uneventful by algebraic calculation, which can be done. The easiest one way to do it is to just decompose the n equal to 3 representation of the n equal to 1 superconformal theory, then use the known result about how various n equal to 1 multiplets contribute to the superconformal index. Using that, you can write down the expression. So there will be an expression for this one, the other one, and this one. Now, of course, it is not when we expect this to be the basic multiplets, you can also get other multiplets and multiply them among themselves. So we also want to take this into account. So for that, we will take this operator and put them in the particular exponential. This is defined in this way. Now, what this thing does is basically take all possible products of this operator, taking due care of the symmetrization properties of the operators. Now, of course, this will mean if you're going to take every possible product, well, of course, not all products may appear actually in the n equal to SCFT. For instance, we already know that the product of this with this and the cubic product of this should be identified at the level of the bigger one part, which this of course will not take. But at least as a minimal guess, it will suffice. Okay, so now you can do this calculation and compare the two, and you find that the difference, they actually match surprisingly well. So that they match up to pretty high order already. In fact, this deviation that you've seen here at order PQ divided by 3 as a natural interpretation has been an overcounting due to the structure, the product of the operators. Notably, the product of these two multiplets, you can analyze it because of these two. So this one is the BB1 associated with the coordinate combination. This one is associated with Z1, Z1 bar. This one with Z1 cubed. So this one associated with Z1 to the 4th and Z1 bar, and we expect this operator to be present. However, the subleading term that you get may or may not be there. And particularly, this contribution with the positive sign is the contribution of this operator, besides the this operator. So a natural interpretation for this difference is this operator, which we have taken into account when we do this particular exponential, is actually not in the n equal to SCFT. Okay. So now in principle, you can continue and try to study the higher order deviation and try to also identify them with operators. This becomes quickly complicated, so I will not do it here. Instead, I will want to try and use the remaining time to talk about one other trick that you can do, and that is to try to study mass deformations. Now, there is one other piece of information we know about the n equal to SCFT. That is that there's a mass deformation leading to an n equal to 2 free n equal to theory. Basically an IR3 n equal to theory that is made from an SU2 gauge n equal to a vector multiplet and a half hypermultiplet in the 4-dimensional representation of the SU2. Now, in fact, there are two such mass deformations, and they form a doublet under the SU2, an SU2 subgroup of the SU3R symmetry group. Now, we can use this for the consistency check basically by looking at what is identifying the deformation in the gauge theory and see what we get after the deformation and see if it's consistent with what we expect from the n equal to SCFT. Of course, to do that, we first need to think about what we actually expect from the n equal to SCFT. Now, naively, as I mentioned, we expect the n equal to IR3 gauge theory. However, that will be true if we did it at the n equal to SCFT point. Well, here we expect that the gauge will generically land us at the n equal to SCFT deformed by marginal deformation. So we need to take into account what the marginal deformation does. Now, naively, the simplest way to explain it, we will get now again a now made from an n equal to 1 SU2 vector multiplet and a chiral P in the floor of the SU2. This theory is sometimes referred to as the ISS model, was studied by various people, and is believed to flow to an interacting superconformal point in the IR. Now, why do we expect to get this theory? Basically, naively, we expect that if previously we got n equal to SU2 gauge theory with the mass deformation, if we also use the margin operator, we should get the same SU2 theory, but deformed by an operator that is the descendant of the deformation that the marginal deformation. Now, the marginal deformation is associated with the dimension, the Coulomb branch operator, and in this theory, the Coulomb branch operator becomes a dimension 2 operator. This is the Coulomb branch becomes dimension 2 operator that is given by the trace of the adjoint chiral square, which introducing will give precisely mass term for the adjoint chiral, and return the n equal to 2 vector multiplet to n equal to 1 vector multiplet. Alternatively, you can also notice the combination of both the marginal operator and the relevant deformation break every symmetry. So naively, we say that every operator will be generated. For them, the only one that is actually relevant is the mass term for the adjoint. The rest of them in this theory, the rest of the all operators are irrelevant. Basic invariant you can build of the flow is a quartic. It's already expected to have our chart that is behind that is making it irrelevant with respect to the superconformal point that is expected to flow to. So this is what our expectation is from the n equal to 3 side. Next, I want to compare this what we expect from the gauge theory. Okay, so as I mentioned, there are two deformations. One of them is given by giving a mass term to the adjoint field. So we call with the theory there was an adjoint field here, but the deformation corresponds to giving it a mass. So given it a mass, this means it's integrated away. There's also potential term. There were two cubic terms involved in this adjoint field because we integrate away, they're replaced by quartic term. So we get this term. Now, you may note that this SU2 gauge group is a collection of 6 chiral fields, and therefore it's supposed to be in the IR, it's going to be Seiberg dual to just 15 free fields, which are given by the 15 gauge invariants you can build from these 6 chiral fields. So expect that the IR behavior of this theory will just confine it and turn it into a collection of free fields. This is therefore we expect to get in the IR this theory. Now this SU2 group is just this SU2 group, joining on for the right. The rest of the fields are given by the gauge invariant combination you can make from these fields. The number illustrates which gauge invariant they are. So this one is given by F with C, it's an adjoint. This is also an adjoint we get from C squared. This fills in the four-dimensional representation of the SU2, which is given by these two combinations, and these two are two doublets, given by the appropriate combinations. Now, this theory is already IR3. So at this point, we don't have to worry about any strong gain dynamics. The only thing we have to worry about are the result potentials, and these two result potentials are precisely mass terms for this adjoint, and these two fundamentals. So expect all of them to be integrated away, and you are left just with an SU2 n equal to 1 SU2 with a chiral field in the four-dimensional representation, exactly as we expect. Now, you can also analyze the other mass information in a similar manner. This is done in the article, but I don't think I have the time to do that here, so I will not carry it out. Instead, I think I'll begin to conclude. So I mentioned that n equal to SCFTs are strongly coupled, and in general, we don't expect to have a Lagrangian similarity if it manifests the full n equal to supersymmetry. However, it may be possible to get them by a mass deformation of a Lagrangian n equal to 1 model. We have discussed the method to try and conjecture such Lagrangian, though relying on the 't Hooft anomaly is the method to conjecture Lagrangian, and then we can try to test it using the superconformal index, supplemented by an understanding of the moduli space of the n equal to SCFT. We have seen an example of how this works by conjecturing a simple Lagrangian distribution for the rank 1 n equal to SCFT with dimension 3 Coulomb operator. I have not talked about it here, although this appears in the article, but this can be generalized to also give an n equal to 1 model, but to be dual to a rank 3 n equal to SCFT. Now, several open questions. One, you can wonder if this can be generalized to other models. So of course, notably, you notice that in here, the n equal to SCFT has an equal to Zeeman conformal manifold. And he said this would play the role in the fact that the flow generically didn't land you at n equal to SCFT point, but as the theory deformed by these marginal operators. This avoids the need to generically enhance, supersymmetry enhance. However, there are n equal to SCFT that naively don't have a conformal manifold. It's interesting if you can also find Lagrangian for them. Now, another interesting question is whether this can be understood from a more general framework, notably maybe string theory. This will first give some explanation on why this visual model works, and also it may give you an opportunity to generalize to other theories. Another interesting thing is whether or not you can use this as some method to realize more speculative n equal to SCFTs. Specifically, notice the only thing I relied here are the anomalies of n equal to SCFT and the structure of the moduli space. There are several speculative n equal to SCFTs that might exist where you know these numbers. Specifically, for instance, they're given by various crystallographic complex reflection groups that it could use as the moduli spaces. Or they could be given by various more. There have been various integral studies of the moduli spaces of n equal to SCFTs, particularly for rank 2. In these cases, you might know these values. So it is interesting if you can use these methods to try and realize them. It's not the more direct way to do it, but it might be interesting to try. Finally, it's interesting there are various questions to do with 3D that I've just put here. One, of course, is what happens when you take these models and you do them to 3D. Now, the n equal to 3 SCFTs, when I use 3D, are expected to flow to the relate to the ABJM n equal to 6 superconformal materials, which have a Lagrangian. So it might be interesting if you can try to say more about the 3D versions. Also, it might be interesting to try and generalize and use similar methods to also try to study n equal to Lagrangians for n equal to 8 or n equal to 6 3D SCFTs. That's, I think, is it.
Thank you, Gabi. So let's thank Gabi for the talk. Beautiful talk. So any questions? So Greg, please go ahead.
So the n equals 3 R symmetry group is a subgroup of the n equals 4 R symmetry group, right?
Yes.
So any topological twist would be of the n equals 3 theory is one we'd already know about from the topological twists of the n equals 4. But are there topological twists of the n equals 3 that are different from the Donaldson-Witten type twist?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with anybody who studied this.
Okay. And did you say that you had an n equals 2 SU2 theory with a hypermultiplet in the 4 of SU2, or was that n equals 1? Yes, n equals 2.
Yeah, this is if you do a master formation of the n equal to 3 SCFT, at the SCFT point, you expect to get an n equal to 2 SU2 gateway with an Eigen multiple in the 4. This is an IR3 theory, so you just flow to trivial theory.
Okay, thanks.
Uh-huh.
I'm a little bit confused about the groups. So what's the R symmetry of the system?
The R symmetry.
Is it SU2 or U2?
The R symmetry of which system?
The n equals 3.
The n equal to 3 SCFT, the R symmetry is U1 times SU3.
And is it combined to U2 in any natural way or not?
You mean as the point of n equal to 2, when you think about it as n equal to 2 theory?
Okay, independent of that, I'd like to clarify something that Greg and you said before. If you're trying to twist this theory, what exactly will you do? Will you identify the SU2 in the superconformal algebra as one of the SU2s in space-time or not? What should we do there?
Well, you can think of the n equal to 3 SCFT as n equal to 2 SCFT. That's, I guess, the simplest thing. Then the SU2 is a subgroup of the SU3, which is embedded just, which is commuting to U1. There are two U1s, one is the commuting of the SU2 inside the SU3, and the other one is the U1R symmetry. And some non-trivial combination of them is usually taken to be the U1R symmetry of n equal to 2 SCFT. The orthogonal combination of them, one that commutes with the combination, is a global symmetry from the n equal to 2 viewpoint.
Any more questions? Okay. If there are no more questions, let's thank Gabi again. Thank you, Gabi. Okay. Thank you. So I guess we're meeting in 2 weeks. Again, thank you very much.